Welcome to Crime Soup Podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Carter.
And I'm Hannah.
And this week we'll be discussing the largest and most fatal school shooting in Canadian history. A word of caution before we begin our episode, we will be discussing graphic details of gun violence, death, and suicide, so please proceed listening with caution. This is the story of the Montreal Massacre. A little after 5 o'clock p.m. on December 6, 1989, 60 students at the École Polytechnique, an engineering school affiliated with the University of Montreal, Canada, were attending class on the second floor when a 25-year-old man with a rifle suddenly entered their classroom. The gunman immediately ordered all of the men to one side of the room and all of the women to the other. At first, nobody moved, thinking it was a joke, until the gunman discharged a single round into the ceiling. Of the 60 or so students in the mechanical engineering classroom that evening, there were only 9 women. All 50 of the men were ordered to leave. Now alone with the gunman, one woman asked him who he was. Avoiding the question, he instead responded that he was there to fight feminism. Nathalie Provost, a 23-year-old student, tried to reason with him, explaining that they were just engineering students, not feminists. This is when the gunman opened fire on the women, discharging about 20 rounds. 6 women were immediately killed, and the other 3 were all injured. Even after their bodies fell to the floor, he continued to shoot. He then left the classroom and made his way throughout the building, wounding and killing several more people, seemingly targeting women in particular. At one point, a 23-year-old student named Maurice Leclerc cried out for help as she was suffering from her wounds. Instead of helping her, the gunman pulled out a hunting knife and stabbed her 3 times, killing her. In just 20 minutes, he managed to kill 14 women and wound several more before taking his own life. Because there are so few school shootings in Canada compared to places like the United States, this one tragedy was named the Montreal Massacre and remains the most fatal school shooting not in just Montreal, but in Canadian history. We know that the gunman was a 25-year-old man named Mark, who was not only familiar with the École Polytechnique, but had actually applied for admission and was actively working on his prerequisite classes up until the massacre. Mark was born in Montreal and had a tumultuous upbringing. His mother divorced his father when he was 7 years old after years of physical abuse. In 1970, Mark's father struck him so hard that it left marks on his face over a week later, which is what prompted his mother to leave the marriage and raise her children alone. Mark's father stopped making child support payments after only 2 months, and so Mark's mother, Monique, went back to school and advanced her career as a full-time nurse to support her family. Mark was described as antisocial and was actually rejected by the military in 1981 after his assessment determined that he was unsuitable for admission. He began working at the hospital where his mother had become the director of nursing, but was fired for being aggressive, disrespectful, and careless. Up until the Montreal Massacre, Mark was actively working on his prerequisite courses for admission to the École Polytechnique, and in April of 1989, he spoke with a university admissions officer and actually complained about how women were taking over the job market from men. On December 6, 1989, the day of the massacre, Mark was actually seen entering the building over an hour before the shooting began. He had frequented the building at least 7 times in the weeks prior, and his rent was overdue for the month of December, which was out of character. Hannah and I are going to read the school shooter's suicide note and kind of break it down with you guys. We're going to go line by line and analyze this note. It starts with, "Forgive the mistakes. I had 15 minutes to write this. See also annex. Would you note that if I commit suicide today, 89/12/06, it is not for economic reasons, for I have waited until I exhausted all my financial means, even refusing jobs, but for political reasons. Because I have decided to send the feminists, who have always ruined my life, to their maker. For 7 years, life has brought me no joy and being totally blasé. I have decided to put an end to those viragos."
First of all, if you just look at the first line, would you note that if I commit suicide today, 89/12/06, which I don't know how things are in Canada, but does it seem weird to put the year first and then the month and then the day?
Is that a thing that people do? I know that other countries put like the month first
Well, no, we put the month first.
Oh, the day first, yeah.
Yeah, but other countries will put the day first, but I don't know if I've ever seen people put the year first.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I don't know. Not important. But he starts his suicide note already trying to defend himself and trying to control the narrative.
Yeah.
Like, he starts out with, just so you, like, if I had to summarize, it'd be like, just so you know, I'm not doing this because I'm an unsuccessful loser
exactly.
who can't get a job. He's like, I'm actually very smart and very capable, and I've actually turned down jobs.
Yep, he's putting on a display of his masculinity, like, seconds before.
Yeah, he's trying to make it very clear, I'm not a loser, I'm actually a winner, and I'm going to show you all what I can do.
Which speaks to his severe insecurity, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, all it does is create the opposite effect where I'm like, this guy's an absolute loser.
Yeah, and he knows he is, like, in his heart of hearts.
What do you think about the fact that he uses the word feminist and not just women? Do you think that that's important? Because in the next line he says, I have decided to send the feminists who have always ruined my life to meet their maker.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because, okay, so number one, I think men who are misogynistic don't really like women because they don't like the idea of women as people. They like women in this, like, idealistic, misogynistic way where women don't have needs or wants or bodily functions or thoughts outside of what's beneficial for men or what contribute to male fantasies. So women are fine as long as they are operating under this idea of what women are, according to misogynistic men. It's feminists who assert themselves as individual people, because isn't it f***ing crazy that they do that? Like, holy shit.
How dare they?
How dare they be people with their own thoughts and feelings and push back against some men's thoughts and opinions? They have an issue with that.
No, I get what you're saying. So you're saying he uses the word feminist when what he really just means is, like, any woman who doesn't fit his individual perception of how women should be. Because, as we'll read later on and learn later on, he was raised by a working single mother, and that he had a lot of beefs with women who worked in dominantly male fields, specifically women in, like, the military and in the police force, who may or may not even be feminist because that's a completely different definition, but in his mind, just any woman who steps outside of her gender role, he views as problematic.
Yeah, I don't think it's harsh enough, but yes, it is fair.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, what happens next?
Starts off next as, I tried in my youth to enter...
Hold on. We forgot to discuss the very last line of the first paragraph.
Oh yeah, the viragos.
So the very last line says, for 7 years, life has brought me no joy, and being totally blasé, I have decided to put an end to those viragos. Which, hold on, I had to look up the exact definition real fast, but just his use of these uncommon words like viragos, like, I had never heard that before, so I had to look it up. I don't think I'm the only one who doesn't hear that word used every day, but apparently a virago is a domineering, violent, or bad-tempered woman.
Hey, shout out. I'm just kidding.
Where are they at? No. Or archaically, it was used to mean a woman of masculine strength or spirit, or a female warrior.
That sounds badass.
He obviously is using it in a demeaning way.
Yeah.
Not saying, like, strong women. He's referring, I think, to women who are too strong and need to be put out.
Yeah, operating outside of their gender role, their perceived gender role.
So he used the word viragos, which, yikes, dude.
Men like this shoot themselves in the foot because they create this perfect idea of what a woman is, and then when they can't find it, they get all depressed and sad because to them they're like, there's no women anymore, there's no good women. There were never any good women like that. It's like if you got all worked up about there not being unicorns existing. Like, unicorns have never existed. We made them up. Like, and you're gonna ruin your whole life about it because they don't exist? Get out.
That's a good point. Because, like, the idea of the perfect woman is mythical. Like,
it's completely and totally mythical. All right, we're moving on to the second paragraph where it begins, I tried in my youth to enter the forces as an officer cadet, which would have allowed me to possibly get into the arsenal and precede Lortie in a raid. They refused me because antisocial behavior. I therefore had to wait until this day to execute my plans. In between, I continued my studies in a haphazard way, for they never really interested me, knowing in advance my fate, which did not prevent me from obtaining very good marks, despite my theory of not handing in work and the lack of studying before exams.
This second paragraph just seems like completely unnecessary. It's just him bolstering his own ego even more.
Seems like he's trying to hype himself up, almost like justify his beliefs and his feelings before he does it.
Well, let's talk about the first sentence. He says, in his youth, he tried to enter the forces as an officer cadet, which would have allowed me to possibly get into the arsenal and precede Lord T. So he's talking about how he was attempting to join the Canadian forces to get access to guns because he was hoping to be a mass shooter long before this. Since he was a child, he's been wanting to do this. It sounds like this was his plan, like right out of high school. He wanted to join the army, get access to guns, and then shoot up a bunch of people, which is what Lord T did. And he's talking about Lord T like he's jealous of him, but also he's trying to set the record straight. He's trying to rewrite history and say, just so you know, I'm not copying Lord T. I could have done this much sooner, but the army rejected me.
Wow.
So he's trying to make it very clear that he's not a copycat, that he's actually this genius, and it was actually his original idea to already do this, but he got rejected due to, I guess, failing his psych exam.
Damn, I wonder why.
I mean, I'm glad that he did fail.
Yeah.
After we're done reading through his note and talking about it, we're going to listen to a professional therapist is going to actually break it down. And from a professional standpoint, she's going to talk about what maybe was going on psychologically with Mark, because Kaylee and I aren't trained to really assess like his mental health or maybe what was going on with him mentally. So after we're done with this, then we'll listen to Freya Miller's analysis of this note. So she'll talk more about him getting declined by the armed forces and what it means whenever he got rejected for having antisocial personality disorder.
I just feel like he has the mentality of a 14-year-old. Like he's emotionally a 14-year-old.
Yeah, and he's only 25 at this time, which is like a little bit too old to be acting this way, but also, I don't know. I mean, there's plenty of immature people who at 25 still act like they're in high school.
Yeah, and I guess like it is probably indisputable that he has childhood trauma from the divorce of his parents and the abuse of his mother by his father and everything that comes with that. And the fact that his father beat them as children. So it makes sense that he's a little bit behind, actually, now that we think about it and say it out loud like that, but does not excuse the behavior.
Yeah, but he's definitely immature and very what it is he's very self-centered, which most people associate with being childlike because children act this way. Children are very self-centered. Children are very needy, right?
Yeah.
Which is a normal stage of development, right? Because children have trouble taking care of themselves, but he's a 25-year-old man, so he shouldn't, at this point in his life, he should understand sympathy. But obviously he doesn't.
That's like bare minimum.
Okay, what happens next?
Even if the mad killer epithet will be attributed to me by the media, I consider myself a rational erudite that only the arrival of the Grim Reaper has forced to take extreme acts. For why persevere to exist if it is only to please the government? Being rather backward-looking by nature, except for science, the feminists have always enraged me. They want to keep the advantages of women, example cheaper insurance, extended maternity leave preceded by preventative leave, while seizing for themselves those of men. This is literally insane to me, and I have so many questions about this this paragraph.
Okay, hit me.
Number one, who do you think he's talking about when he says being rather backward-looking by nature except for science? Is he talking about himself or the feminists?
So I think he's trying to say he has traditional values and he hates feminists because they do not have traditional values, which we've already established.
Yeah, I guess it's just the structure of the sentence, which is probably just because it was translated from French is why it confused me. Also, the insanity of the advantages of women, like cheaper insurance, that's insurance companies' issue, which we can get into that later, but like...
Yeah, there's almost no point in even trying to argue his point about he believes that women have an advantage because it's just so stupid.
Yes. It is an advantage to get maternity leave after birthing an entire human being where your insides are absolutely wrecked after growing a human being for 9 months. Like, how is maternity leave
an advantage?
An advantage after you just birthed a human.
Here's
Birthing is a disadvantage.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah. His points don't actually make sense. He's mad because he feels like women get special treatment and he doesn't.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's not that women are treated differently because we are different, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, we need maternity leave if we just pushed out a baby.
Yeah.
That's not an advantage, that's a need, right?
And also, men should get paternity leave.
Yeah.
But, like, that's, like, if you want paternity leave, just say that.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't have to say women shouldn't get maternity leave.
It's so weird. Yeah, no, it's coming from a place of just hatred and, honestly, stupidity, in my opinion.
Major stupidity.
I love that he tries to list off advantages of women and he can't actually come up with anything actual.
Maternity leave.
Which, this is in Canada, so they actually get maternity leave. In the U.S., we don't.
No. Yeah.
I'm reading this and I'm like, you guys are getting maternity leave? In the U.S., it's like, that sounds like a personal problem.
Yeah. Just pushed a baby out of you.
He probably would have been happier in the United States.
He honestly would have.
Canada was a little bit too progressive for him.
Yeah.
He would prefer our good old-fashioned values in the United States where you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you hate women. We don't give them maternity leave. We just say, suck it up, buttercup.
And it's absolutely crazy because Canada, while it is more progressive than the United States, it's not that progressive.
No,
like,
no. But like,
he would have been happier.
He's a mass shooter. Like, he would fit right in here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, in Canada, he is the most successful school shooter that they've ever had. Here, he's chump change.
Yeah, we keep making new records every day. The whole thing is insane.
Well, there's not a paragraph in here. Yeah, there's not a paragraph in here that I'm like, he's making some valid points. Absolutely not. Completely unhinged.
Every sentence I read only makes me hate him more and think less of him.
Here's the other thing, though. Like, the way he talks about women, it makes me think he's never even talked to one.
I probably hasn't, honestly. And you know, men like this that actually have talked to women don't actually talk to women like they're people. Like, you know, when you have a conversation with a man and he is telling you all about himself and he does not ask you one question. He does not try and get to know you in any way whatsoever. He's just like dumping all of this information about himself. And then at the end, he's like, that was a really good connection that we have. I think like we really hit it off. And you're like, I didn't speak once, first of all. You don't even know my last name. Like
Probably doesn't even know your first name.
He probably doesn't even know my first name. You don't know me. You just like talking about yourself.
100%.
We're reading this guy's final paragraph, not because we want to or anything, just because we think he's a moron. We want to expose him for what he really is. Okay, last paragraph. Okay, on a side note, actually, before I start, I think we should bully all mass shooters. We should bully all rapists. Like, what's stopping us from absolutely bullying the shit out of these people and ruining their lives? Like, ruining their legacies, I mean.
Isn't that what they already say, is that they start their mass shooting because they're being bullied? They're already getting bullied, probably.
I was bullied and I didn't get turned into a mass shooter.
That's true.
Or a rapist, or like, damn.
Yeah, it's like when people talk about, well, you got bullied, and I'm like, dude, or when they talk about mental illness, and it's like, yeah, there's plenty of women with mental illnesses, and like, strangely enough, there's like very few female mass shooters.
Crazy. It's almost like something else is factoring into this. Yeah, we can't keep blaming shit like this on mental illness because not everybody who has a mental illness is going to do this. I think most people who have mental illness won't do this. And there are lots of people with the exact same experiences and they don't come out on the other side like this. So why is it that mostly men are ending up mass shooters, rapists, serial killers because of mental illness and bullying? Like,
so I was talking to my coworker just a couple nights ago, and he said something that, like, I already knew, but he phrased it so succinctly. He said, if you ever see a man doing something stupid, it's probably because he's insecure.
Oh, yeah. I feel like that's something I innately knew deep within my heart, because when I see it, I feel that. Okay, now we're on to the final paragraph.
Okay.
Thus, it is an obvious truth that if the Olympic Games removed the men-women distinction, there would be women only in the graceful events. So the feminists are not fighting to remove that barrier. They are so opportunistic they do not neglect to profit from the knowledge accumulated by men through the ages. They always try to misrepresent them every time they can. Thus, the other day, I heard they were honoring the Canadian men and women who fought at the front line during the World Wars. How can you explain that since women were not authorized to go to the front line? Will we hear of Caesar's female legions and female galley slaves who, of course, took up 50% of the ranks of history, though they never existed? A real casus belli.
This whole paragraph, this guy, he has such a punchable face. Okay, so the first sentence, okay, let's talk about the first sentence. He's talking about the Olympic Games. He's saying if you removed like the men-women distinction, he says there would be women only in the graceful events. Which, first of all, I don't believe.
No, absolutely not.
And second of all, he sees that as some sort of, again, a female advantage. Like, women get maternity leave and they're good at volleyball.
Fuck them. Fuck them for that. Like, what the hell?
Right? Like, that's what he's saying. Like,
yeah.
He killed all these women and this was his argument. This is the best he could come up with. He's just he's at an absurd level of anger where you have to wonder, like, what is he actually mad at? Because I don't think it's actually women that he's mad at. There's an underlying cause for this anger and insecurity. And actually, Freya is going to talk about this. So she's going to break down the suicide note and she's going to talk about this, about how she believes that Mark in particular, the way that he talks about women, it may not necessarily mean that he does hate women. It's just that he's constantly in a state of feeling like a victim. Mm-hmm. And he probably changes who the oppressor is and probably has changed who the oppressor is multiple times. At this point in time when he committed the massacre, it happened to be women, but probably throughout his life, it's probably changed who it is that he feels is responsible for his life being miserable.
Yeah.
He doesn't ever actually state any particular thing. Like, he never says, my girlfriend broke up with me, or my mom beat me, or he doesn't actually state anything personal. These are all, like, weird
social issues.
Yeah, like, he talks about he talks about women in sports. He talks about women at war. Mm-hmm. He talks about maternity leave. None of these things, as a 25-year-old man, affect him.
No.
Like, when would he have ever actually felt the repercussions of any of these things? Like, if they're gonna salute female soldiers, why does that bother him?
Number one, women still went off to war. Women were nurses. Women got caught in as civilian casualties. Like,
yeah.
It takes a single brain cell to wrap your head around some of these issues, especially these issues that do not affect him in any way whatsoever. And he didn't use a single one.
No. And so that actually brings me to another question, and I wanted to know your thoughts. So, like, where do you think he's getting these ideas from? Because these are all things that, like, maternity leave, for example, that doesn't affect him. It probably has never affected him. He probably doesn't even know any women who have even taken maternity leave. So where is he getting these ideas from? Because this is 1989, right? So there isn't like social media for him to like be on Reddit or Twitter or something. Where did he get these ideas from? Because I don't think that they were organic. I don't think that he came up with these things himself. I think he was getting them from somewhere. I think somebody was stirring the pot.
Yeah. Weren't like the 70s kind of the sexual revolution in terms of the feminist movement?
Yeah, so like sexual liberation would have been like late 60s, and then second wave feminism was the 70s, yeah.
I'm wondering what was happening socially around those topics at the time in Canada, because I think Canada probably was a little bit ahead of the United States in terms of those issues. So it's probably being talked about. And every time women talk about, hey, we would like to be treated as equally as men are, there are some men that lose their f***ing minds. Like, you have it so good. You like, why are you throwing a tantrum? You're not oppressed. You have it totally fine. We don't force you to be sex slaves. We don't tell you what to wear. We don't tell you what to think. Therefore, you are a free person and you're just as equal as me. Like, and so I wonder if that kind of discourse was happening at the time, and he was a young, impressionable boy listening to some of those things and listening to men that he looked up to saying some of those things about women.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Because what year was he born? 25. So he was born in 64? if my math is right. So, yeah, he would have been a young, impressionable child at the time of the sexual revolution.
So, since 1988, in Canada, abortion has been legal. And I'm going to look up.
So that was the year before this happened?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there you go. You know what I think is happening in his last paragraph?
What?
I think he's upset because, well, he specifically talks about how women are getting recognized for achievements that he doesn't feel that they deserve.
Yeah.
And I think that's his own insecurity, that he feels like he's not getting recognized for his achievements.
Okay, so this is a side note because I absolutely agree. In 1964 in Canada, women were allowed to open a bank account without obtaining their husband's signature. In 1971, maternity benefits were added to unemployment insurance. And in 1977, the Canadian Human Rights Act was passed, prohibiting the discrimination on the basis of sex and ensuring equal pay for work of equal value. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these things were probably leading up, and there were probably a lot of like anti-feminist movements. And then in the last part of the letter, he lists 19 names and telephone numbers of women he identified as feminists who he was specifically targeting. And then he signed with something in French that I don't know.
No, I think it's Latin. It's alia jacta est, which means the die has been cast.
Ah.
Which I think is his way of saying that, like, he's already made up his mind. And he puts it at the very end, I think, because he's just like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go through with this. Today's the day. Even at the end of his letter, like, he starts the letter making excuses. And then at the end, he's still making excuses, because at the very end, he says, all of these women who, none of the women on his list, I don't think actually were attacked. He made a list of 19 women. He says they nearly died today, which I don't think was even the case. I don't think he was anywhere near prepared enough to even go through with that. Because he had a list of just like all these, even celebrities or like news anchors and people. It's like he was planning on hunting down all 19 of them. That doesn't make any sense.
No.
But he says they nearly died today. The lack of time, because I started too late, has allowed these radical feminists to survive. So he starts the letter making excuses. He ends the letter making excuses, and I wonder if that's how his whole life has gone, is just him making excuses.
He's created a brand for himself in this letter, like a very unfortunate brand, but I think it's an accurate one. You're right.
Now we're going to hear from Freya Miller, who's our professional therapist, and hear some of her insights. But also I wanted to let you know that we have redacted the gunman's full name. So if you hear a beep, that's what it is.
Hi, this is Freya Miller. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've been asked to share a few thoughts on the suicide note that was found, written by the individual who was responsible for the Montreal Massacre. So I wanted to just comment on a few things that I found kind of interesting. First of all, when I received this file, it was labeled suicide note for, and I want to talk about that a little bit because in some ways this note does appear to meet kind of some of the criteria that you would see in a suicide note, and in other ways it doesn't quite fit the bill. So generally with suicide notes, you get someone who is emotionally torn. They're in a very despondent and hopeless place in their life. And as a result, they're writing a note sometimes to kind of explain the why of why they're committing suicide. Sometimes they're written to help prevent others from feeling guilty that they didn't know that they were in such a bad state, or to feel guilty from not stopping the suicide. Other times they're written to create guilt and maybe make people feel bad about how they treated them. So Mark's note is kind of interesting because he does explain the why for his behavior, and he does talk about suicide. He mentions a few things, the idea of, 7 years that he's been essentially depressed or blasé. Another line where he mentions, I consider myself a rational erudite that only the arrival of the Grim Reaper has forced to take extreme acts. He knows he's going to commit suicide. He has a plan to commit suicide. What I think is interesting about this note is I get the sense that this is a man who possibly was already planning to commit suicide. He was very unhappy with his life. He had very little to show for his life. He felt like a failure. And once deciding he was going to commit suicide, I get the sense he then decided, I also want to send a message. So maybe for him, it wasn't enough just to end his own life. Like he said, he was depressed, he was blasé, he was, he had stopped earning money. he didn't just want to die. He decided also that he wanted to kind of go out with a certain message to share. So in a way, instead of a suicide note, I would view what he's written here as more of sort of a declaration or more of a manifesto. I've decided to commit suicide, and since I have to die, or I've decided that I'm going to die, I might as well also make a political statement at the very beginning, right? I'm not doing this for economic reasons. I'm not doing this because I'm a mad killer, right? I'm doing this because I want to die, and one of the reasons why I want to die and why life has been so hard for me, women, they're the worst, right? That's kind of my sense with this. Not only did he want to die and he wanted to point the finger, he really, in writing this note, wanted to control the narrative around why he was doing it. He didn't want people to come up with their own theories or think maybe he did it for this reason or this reason. He wanted to very specifically punctuate his death with the explanation that, yes, my life has been miserable. It's been miserable because, and in large part, because of these feminists who have ruined my life. And if I'm going to die because my life is so ruined by them, some of them should die in the process as well. Another part of the note that I wanted to mention was that he has a paragraph, the second paragraph, where he talks about wanting to enter forces as an officer or cadet, but that he was refused entry because they deemed him antisocial. So although I don't have the records and I don't know exactly what it was that the forces were concerned about when it came to allowing him into their institution, one thing I want to consider is that antisocial can mean a couple different things. And my guess here is that they weren't necessarily saying that he's kind of a shy guy who doesn't like to talk to people. My guess is that they were probably alluding to him possibly putting off some red flags that he has a personality disorder. So antisocial personality disorder is the diagnosis that you would give to someone that you have determined is a psychopath or a sociopath. A main tenet of antisocial personality disorder is that they don't have care or regard for other people. Other people don't matter to them. And as a result, someone with antisocial personality disorder that has kind of gone off the rails, you'll see them participating in the worst behavior towards humanity, lying, stealing, manipulating, death, right? If you don't care about people, if people don't mean anything to you, then what is it going to bother you to shoot and kill them? So antisocial personality disorder is one idea with personality disorders for Mark. I would throw out a couple others that if he was a client coming into my office that I would want to rule out, take a look at, I would suggest, first of all, narcissistic personality disorder. And then another one would be possibly paranoid personality disorder. One thing that you need to know about personality disorders is that they generally do not change a whole lot. The symptoms can lessen over time as someone gets older, but generally talk therapy, medication, and things like that don't necessarily mean that somebody's going to improve in their personality disorder. Most of the time, individuals with these disorders don't even recognize that they have them, and it's only because people that raise them or are dating them or work with them notice these traits and start to catch on that there's something off, there's something going on with this individual, and my relationship with them is not good. Their relationship is not good with most people, things like that. And other people will bring the disorder to that person's attention. A lot of times, like for example, with narcissists or antisocial, they don't see a problem. Even when it's pointed out to them, they're not sure why they necessarily should have to work on it. If that person is troubled by it, then they can go work on something themselves. So a lot of times they don't seek out treatment. Even when they do seek out treatment, it's often very difficult to treat. It's very frustrating for them as well as for the clinician, let alone family members who actually do care for the individual with the personality disorder and that are generally possibly not being treated very well by the individual with the disorder. Just a couple reasons why I would maybe put Mark into a category with personality disorder, narcissism, or possibly paranoid. With narcissism, there could be many issues that we could look at here, and without knowing Mark, of course, this is all just guesses on my part. But essentially, in even his note, we see kind of a grandiosity, a belief that he is maybe better than others. Even in notes where he mentions how he was doing schoolwork, but he was doing it haphazardly, he goes out of his way to make a point that, even though I was only kind of interested in school and didn't really care about it, I still got really good marks, even though I didn't hand in my work and I didn't study for my exams, right? So he's putting in this information possibly to be impressive, the need to be admired. It's obvious it's important to him to not be seen as some sort of dummy, right? It wasn't that he didn't finish in college or his programs or his degrees because he was not a smart guy. The reason is because women took those spots and those positions away from him. Narcissism, we also see a real solid lack of empathy, basically little to no motivation to even consider other people's feelings. So it's not that they're medically or cognitively unable to feel empathy. It's that they have no motivation. Other people don't matter. So why would I spend any time or effort trying to understand what other people are going through or how something has impacted somebody else, which of course fits pretty well with someone who's going to go in and murder, shoot so many innocent people. They tend to be very interpersonally vulnerable. They're not great with other people. They tend to also have a lot of insecurities, which can be hard to recognize because they really overcompensate with their grandiosity and trying to show everybody how great they are, but inside they don't feel well, which is actually part of the reason why narcissists are susceptible to suicidal ideation. They tend to deal with a lot of emotional distress. They tend to be very competitive. One of the things that just kind of pops out for me with Mark is that he was someone who seemed to have a really weak sense of self, and that can kind of fit in with narcissism and other personality disorders. This is a young man who really didn't know who he was, and as a result, I think maybe because he was narcissistic or something along those lines, he tried to figure out who he was by being successful. And when he wasn't successful, couldn't handle that. He couldn't handle that almost criticism. And so instead of seeing himself and accepting that he had not been successful or that he had made mistakes or that he was not doing well, he had to turn that all around and he had to blame, and put the responsibility for why he wasn't doing well on other people. That's how frail his sense of self was. Most likely, I think this definitely would go back to how he was raised early in life. And I don't know a whole lot about that, other than I get the sense that his father was abusive, was not someone that provided or met his emotional needs, and he ended up living with his mother. But this work that someone would need to do, for example, like if we wanted someone who had a difficult childhood, hopefully not to turn into or not develop a full-on personality disorder like narcissism or antisocial, in therapy you would want to do a lot of work around stabilizing and securing the person's sense of self. And if that person early in childhood did not have secure attachment, did not feel unconditionally loved and cared for by their family, essentially it's very likely that their brain has been hardwired to always feel that way and to always be insecure. For individuals with these personality disorders that are able to recognize how these disorders are impacting the things they want in life, the relationships they want, the careers they want, the family they want, those are the ones that we see best able to actually work with a therapist and take accountability for some of their shortcomings, those deficits, and to be able to really buckle down and stabilize who they are and who they want to be. One other note I just want to say is Mark starts this letter with forgive the mistakes, I think referencing mistakes he may have made in writing his declaration. And then he ends the letter with sorry for this too brief a letter. I think it's just a little ironic that we've got a declaration that he's written where he's, letting us know that he's going to be ending the lives of many women. And he explains clearly why he's ending their lives and why he's upset with them. But he doesn't ask for forgiveness about that behavior. But he does ask forgiveness for if there's any spelling mistakes in the letter, and also asks forgiveness that the letter's not very long, and it almost creates a situation where you might think in his mind, he's thinking, oh, I know they would want more from me. They would love to get 5 full pages of writing. That would be ideal. They would love that. They're going to be cursing themselves that they just have this short letter from me. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic to start out with forgive me and sorry, but then at the same time, like it's demonstrating complete lack of basic human empathy for the people that are going to be so impacted by the death of these women, and the community is going to be impacted by the death of these women. Okay, just one more thought that I wanted to put out there is that individuals oftentimes who have personality disorders or maybe dealing with antisocial or narcissism, they tend to change their minds a lot, and especially when it comes to who is responsible for their misery. Oftentimes we see them, I'm the victim, I'm the victim, I'm the victim. but whoever it is victimizing him might change. So I just want to throw this out here that in this moment, Mark is expressing how angry he is about feminism, about women taking positions at the college, that he wants to go to. He mentions the Olympic Games, he mentions maternity leave, things like that. And in that moment, they're the perpetrator to his victimhood. I kind of wonder, and I don't have access to, but maybe there's additional writings from other times in his life when he was still feeling pretty victim-y, but maybe it wasn't women that he was blaming at the time. I think it's very possible he may have changed up throughout his short time who was responsible for his suffering, his father, his mother, the school system, some specific teacher, things like that. And at the time of this letter and at the time that he's decided to end his life, unfortunately, it was feminists, it was women in general. But if it hadn't been feminists, it probably would have been some other group or entity that he felt he could blame and hold accountable for his victimhood and his suffering.
In 1991, the Parliament of Canada established the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, in remembrance of the École Polytechnique victims, and it's commemorated every year on December 6th, the anniversary of the shooting. Canadian flags on all federal buildings are flown at half-mast, and everyone is encouraged to wear either a purple or white ribbon as a commitment to end violence against women. Also in response to the massacre, Bill C-68, which included the Firearms Act, was introduced in 1993 and passed in 1995 that made amendments to the Canadian gun ownership requirements. Some of the changes to Canadian gun laws included: 1. Only those with a gun license can purchase guns or ammunition. Obtaining a license includes a gun safety course and a background check. And 2. All guns now need to be registered with the government. Originally, the proposal for a national gun registry was quoted at $2 million yearly, funded by taxpayers, but the cost to maintain the registry has consistently run far over budget and has become a source of controversy, with critics arguing that the registry does not reduce gun violence and it is not worth maintaining. As always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Be sure to follow us on social media and let us know your thoughts on this case. You can find us on Instagram at crime_soup and on TikTok at Crime Soup Podcast. Tune in next Tuesday for your next helping of delicious crime soup. Bon appetit!